Today we will talk about the feminist criticism. So, feminist criticism basically deals with the equality of sexes for the rights of women, for the social, political, economical, and psychological uh, prospects of women. So, first of all, we will discuss about what is feminism. Feminism is basically the belief in social, economical, and political equality of the sexes. Although largely originating in the West, feminism is manifested worldwide and it is represented by the various institutions committed to activity on the behalf of women's rights and interests. Throughout most of Western history, women are confined to the domestic sphere while public life are reserved for men. So, what is feminist criticism? Feminist criticism is a form of literary criticism that based on feminist theories, broadly understood to be concerned with the politics of feminism, and it uses feminist principles to critique the male dominated literature. Feminist criticism's roots are in women's social, political, economic, and psychological oppression by seeking to view women in a new perspective and discovers women's contribution to the literary history. So, feminist criticism basically aims to reinterpret the old texts and establish the importance of women's writing to save it from being lost or ignored in the male dominated world. It also seeks to establish females' perspective as being of equal importance relative to males' perspectives. So, what are the major concerns of the feminist criticism? At its core, feminist criticism concerns itself with stereotypical representations of the genders. Thus, although there are many ideas that can be considered through a feminist lens, feminist criticism is primarily concerned with the few ideas and issues that help feminist critics examine gender politics in the work, trace the subtle construction of masculinity and femininity, and understand gender politics within literary works. The second one is the women's oppression by the patriarchy. Feminist critics argue that women's oppression has gone on for ages in patriarchal cultures. In this view, women's oppression has social, economic, political, and psychological aspects and is tied directly to the traditional system of male dominance at the head of the family. Patriarchal family structures are represented in nearly all cultures' old literary works. The view that women are secondary. Women's oppression had historically been rationalized as being due to supposed to differences in male versus female physical and mental capabilities. In patriarchal culture, women are often granted few decision making powers and are considered as secondary. Again, this view is seen in many books and literature across culture and societies. Another point is the cultural discrimination against women. When women are considered as a feminine counterpart to male masculinity, some male authors, especially those who produce religious work, position women as a cause of sin and death. The story of Adam and Eve, in which Eve caused the first man and the women's expulsions from the Garden of Eden, is a classic example of this trope. Another point of view is that the feminist theory alignment with the three waves of feminism. Feminist criticism has roughly aligned with the three waves of feminism, so there are three rough periods of feminist criticism, each with their own defining characteristic that corresponds with each phase of women's overall political emancipation. So we will discuss first of all we will discuss about the first wave of feminism. It basically deals with men's treatment of women and it started in 1700 late 1700 and ends in early 19s. The first wave feminism largely focused on the inequalities between the sexes. This is also the wave of feminism that contains the women's suffrage movement led by Susan B. Anthony and Victoria Woodhull. Thus, the first wave of feminism criticism largely focused on how male authors and novelists view and portray women in their work. Critics in this time considered the way in which novelists discriminate against and marginalized women's characters. Some key books from these times are Geoffrey Chaucer's Wife of Bath, Mary Wollstonecraft, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Mary Elsman Thinking About Women, Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, Ellen Millett and Germaine Greer played an important role in the raising questions about the practices of showing feminism in both contemporary and canon literature. So the second wave of feminism basically deals with gynocriticism. It started in early 1960s and ends in late 1970s. The second wave of feminism focused on establishing more equal working conditions which were necessary in the US during World War II and bringing women together for feminist political activism. The feminist criticism during the wave is also called gynocriticism and it involves three major aspects: examination and recognition of female writers' work, consideration of the treatment of women in literary works by both male and female authors, exploring the canon of literature written by female writers in order to understand female writers' contribution in the context of female empowerment, and criticizing the way women had been treated and mistreated in various cultures. During this time, Simone de Beauvoir and Elaine Sholter established the groundwork for feminist theories and helped them separate more broadly. In her book, A Literature of Their Own, Showalter proposed three phases of women's writing. The first is feminine phase, second is feminist phase, and third is female phase. In feminine phase, women writers try to follow the rules made by men writers, try to avoid debating and questioning women's place in the literature, and try to write as men by using male pseudonyms. The second phase is feminist phase. In feminist phase, women writers begin criticizing women treatment in society and literature, and the oppressions of women in society is the main theme of gender criticism in their work. And the third is female phase. In female phase, basically the women's writer began moving from merely providing the women's perspective to having confidence in their work and assuming that whatever they have written is valid and doesn't need aggressive argument and strong support to prove its authenticity. Then we have the third wave of feminism. It starts in early 1990s and it's still going on. This wave of feminism seeks to resist the perceived essentialist, overgeneralized, and oversimplified ideologies and white heterosexual middle class focus of second wave feminism. It borrows from post structural and contemporary race and gender theories to expand on marginalized populations' experiences. Third wave feminists emphasize individual rights as well as acceptance of diversity. Third wave's roots are in the right grill feminist punk subculture that begins in Olympia, Washington in early 1990s. That subculture began with the purpose of bringing consciousness and political togetherness through the punk style. In this time, writers such as Alice Walker worked to reconcile feminism with their own minority communities' concern. Some key works to understand the wave's feminist criticism are Deborah McDowell's New Directions to the Black Feminist Criticism, Alice Walker in Search of Mother Gardens, and Robinson's Treasons of Text Feminist Challenges to the Literary Canon, Paglia's Sexual Persona, The Androgyne in Literature and Art, Roitkills and Sarah Dwyer's Action Girl newsletter also played important role in creating and iconographic the styles for the Zine movement for female in this era. So basically, in third wave of feminism, there was a changed view toward feminism in the third wave. Third wave feminist authors and critics argue that feminism's meanings has changed considerably and needs to now be viewed with a different perspective. They believe that women need to rise above concerns about equality, mainly in job, education, or family settings. Instead, third wave feminist argues women's need to raise their voices and fight for their rights. Chief Justice Clarence Thomas' appointment to the Supreme Court, despite sexual harassment allegations against him by Anita Hill, was a major tripping point for this movement. For women in the third wave, Thomas' appointment illustrated the need for more work for feminism. So, keywords, what are the keywords in feminist criticism? There are few keywords in feminist criticism that one must understand in order to follow many works. The first one is patriarchy, that it basically deals with traditional male dominated society. The second one is marginalization, the process or state of being forced to the edges of social and political significance. So, what are the practices of feminist criticism? Feminist criticism is applied to literature by examining the character's portrayal, the text language, the author's attitude, and the inter-character relationships. Feminist critics are also considered the author's apparent commentary about society as a whole. Some questions that feminist critics may ask include: how is the relationship between men and women portrayed? What are the power relationships between men and women? How are male and female roles defined? What constitutes masculinity and femininity? What does the work reveal about the operations, either these are economic, political, social, or psychological, of patriarchy? What does the work imply about the possibilities of sisterhood as a mode of resisting patriarchy? What does the work say about women's creativity? What does the history of work's reception by the public and the critics tell us about the operation of patriarchy? So, what are the feminist criticism's goal? Ultimately, feminist criticism, like the broader feminist movement itself, asks us to consider the relationship between men and women and their relative roles in society. Much of feminist criticism reminds us that men and women's roles in society are often unequal and reflective of a particular patriarchal ideology, and these realities are often represented in both the production of literature and literary texts themselves. Deborah Appelman, a professor of education studies at Carleton College, says feminist theorists ask readers to pay particular attention to their patterns of thoughts, behavior, values, and powers in male-female relationships. Feminist literary critics remind us that literary values, conventions, and even the production of literature have themselves been historically shaped by men. They invite us to consider the writings of women, both new and forgotten, and also ask us to consider viewing familiar literature through a feminist perspective. By considering literature and world around us from a feminist perspective, feminist critics seek to make us more aware of the society's attitudes towards women, especially in cases where current attitudes harms or otherwise marginalize women. By recognizing women's value and their contributions to the literature and society, feminist criticism seeks to evaluate women to their rightful place in society as contributors to an important element of literary works and society writ large. So this is basically the feminist criticism, that how feminist critics works and what are their major goal they want to achieve, what are the questions they are basically they want to ask, and what are the questions whose answers basically they are going to explore. This is all about the feminist criticism. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe my channel for another informative videos. Thank you.